Hi everybody, welcome to the Art League of Ocean City, and thanks for coming out on such a beautiful night to see a great presentation tonight, and hope you'll stop and see all of the beautiful artwork that's around us. Upstairs is the Shadow photography exhibit, and downstairs we have Crystal Mall from Baltimore, who is actually judging our plein air event this year in August, and everything here that you see was created in plein air, which meant that it was created outside on the scene, so she has beautiful work. But tonight, you're in for a treat, and I want to introduce the new Arm and Harriet Robinson Fellow for Contemporary Art and Community Engagement. He is our fellow for this year. Orm and Harriet were my parents, and I have given this in honor of them. They were both educators and found art late in life. So it really meant a lot to them. So I'm thrilled to be able to give this back. But Aric is a rock star. I mean, that's just all there is. And he's got students here that can attest to that. But he's a real rock star. I mean, I just look at his resume and I just go through it. And there's not a lot he hasn't done in his professional life and his teaching career. It's just amazing. He graduated from Salisbury State University and went on to study abroad for 3 semesters at the Canberra School of Art in Australia. Went on to the Alfred University, and at present he is a glassblowing master professor at glassblowing at Salisbury. His work includes Alfred University in New York, Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. With his professional experience, it's just doesn't get any better. Steuben Glass, Corning Museum of Glass, a current product designer for Holmegard.
Yeah, that's correct, yep.
In Copenhagen. So his residencies, artists in residence all over the world, Denmark, Norway, New York, workshops and lectures, publications. So like I say, I could go on and on. But you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from Aric. And we are so thrilled to have you with the Art League as our fellow, and welcome, Aric.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, and thanks to everyone here at the Art League. I've felt very welcome since I've joined, and I've been greeted by a very generous and supportive community. So I'm really, really happy to be part of this institution. I kind of feel like it's the first day of summer and I'm already dreading going back to school, in the sense that I don't want this fellowship to end. I'm already like, no, it's already going too fast, like we gotta slow it down. So I'm happy to be here to kind of introduce myself and my work, and happy to be taking a bus trip to the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia next month. So if you haven't considered it, think about joining us for that. It's going to be a really fun day. So, welcome. Designing a Life in Glass. My life and my work is very much tied with my personal and work experience. I can't separate the two out, so it was kind of a perfect introduction to talk about the places I've been and the places that I've worked. I'll talk more about that tonight. But this first piece is designed from 2016. And I don't know about you, but during COVID, time changed. It didn't mean the same thing anymore. And I go back to this piece during this kind of compressed or expanded period of time that we've been experiencing. The architect Rem Koolhaas describes time as being like a barcode. So some parts of that barcode are really compressed and tight together, and then other periods of time feel more expansive and stretched out. So, you know, being in quarantine and being in lockdown and teaching online, I think all of us have had a different experience of time. When I designed this, it was kind of with that in mind. You know, we know that time is relative, and we have a tendency as humans to measure things that we don't fully understand. And time's a great example, right? We can measure time down to the atomic level, but we're still not really sure what it is. So it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like inventing a metronome without fully understanding what music is, right? So this device was never really fully intended to accurately measure time. It was more designed to be a device to allow the user to kind of contemplate the meaning of time or the idea of time. So while it does measure time accurately in the upright position, the user can manipulate it and kind of slow down, if you will, kind of the measurement of time. So this will also kind of illustrate my process. So it doesn't start with this shiny finished object with the great photos. It starts like this. A really lumpy, put together quickly prototype that I make in the glass blowing studio. The cork base was made from a couple of yoga blocks that I glued together, and it's just all to get the idea out quickly. From there, I had a prototype made by a kind of a mad scientist, scientific flame worker in New Zealand, and from there we came up with the final blueprints. So this is actually made the same way that scientific labware is made, using Pyrex, and it's because of the precision of the object itself. So I would never be able to execute this perfectly in my style of glass making, so I employ the help of experts. So these are manufactured in New Jersey by the Ace Glass Corporation, which is the same place that makes all of the crazy scientific apparatus that you see in labs. This is the final product at a client's home in Germany. I always enjoy seeing the work, after it goes on to have another life, and I feel like I get to visit it a little bit. So I wanted to kick off with that because time is different now, but we got to start from the beginning. This is where it all started. 1985, Bel Air, Maryland. I think I won honorable mention for that elephant that year. But it really did start here. I come from a family of artists and teachers, and so it's no surprise that I find myself where I do. I always did ceramics, and when I started at Salisbury State University, I initially was an English major, but I decided I should do something more practical with my life, and I became a glassblower. This is the first piece that I made in Intro to Glass. This is kind of for my students here to see. And this was the first piece where I just thought to myself, like, yeah, this is it. Where do I sign? This has got to be the thing. And if you're wondering if that is Tang, yes, it is Tang. Inside of 2 glass vessels with water. And so it's just kind of found its natural disbursement. So I was at Salisbury University for about 2 years. And once I started in glass, I knew that I had to go somewhere more established. We had just set up the studio using spare parts, and we didn't have a roof at that point. It was outside. So my professor suggested I go to an art school in Australia where he had studied, the Canberra School of Art. And I didn't need any convincing, but I did have to kind of figure out a way to graduate. Parents are always concerned with that kind of thing. So with a major change and a few really understanding advisors, I was able to transfer to the Canberra School of Art, and I spent a year and a half there where things really got serious. I consider the Canberra School of Art my bachelor's degree. It was kind of like grad school light. It was a very serious, rigorous program, and we were in the studios, it felt like 24/7, 365. The man on the right is Stephen Proctor, and he was kind of my first mentor. He was the one that told me, if you really want to succeed, you really have to have a fire in your belly. This isn't for the faint of heart. You really have to commit fully to this life that will be, the arts. So Stephen Proctor, this is my class here, very international group of students. And while I was in Australia, I became obsessed with these objects on the right. These are called tektites. And tektites are one of the 7 or 8 naturally occurring forms of glass on planet Earth. And they're formed when a giant meteor hits the Earth and spews up molten material. And when that molten material returns to Earth, it forms in these very aerodynamic shapes. And they're only found in very specific parts of the world called strewn fields. And it just so happened that one of the largest strewn fields in the world is Australia. And they tend to have specific shapes for those specific locations. And the bottom right, that's called the australite, only found in Australia. So you can kind of imagine it goes up into the air as a sphere of molten material, and as it's burning its way back down to Earth, it forms that kind of wave ring, kind of like a UFO or a flying saucer. So it's all molten material formed with gravity, heat, centrifugal force, all those forces. So I went out and tried to find them, because I was young. So I did manage to go out into the outback and find some pretty big craters, but never found any, for myself. It was more about the journey, I think. Here we go out into the outback, Uluru, formerly known as Ayers Rock, and I just made a point to get out and really see the country. Canberra is the capital of Australia. It's kind of like DC, so you want to get out when you can, yeah. But because I couldn't find any, I started making them. So the australite on the right, and kind of these teardrop forms on the left that I would heavily carve the outside to kind of resemble that pitted surface of the tektite. And then I started cutting them open to get kind of a reveal on the inside. So most of my work there revolved around this idea of the tektite, naturally occurring glass, gravity, centrifugal force, things like that. The one exception was this piece here. So while I was there, the Bombay Sapphire Company ran one of their Martini art competitions. And the art school never really encouraged design. It was kind of seen as something you would do as a hobby. It was more about fine arts. The design really didn't come into our curriculum very often. And so this was kind of mentioned as like something extra you could do. When they called and said, we want you to attend the awards ceremony, my professor, Jane Bruce, was kind of like, okay, you can go, but you have to be back for class tomorrow, And this was like in a city 6 hours away. I missed my flight, I didn't make it back. But she wasn't mad because, it turned out okay. But this is kind of like the first time in my life that I thought, like, this is a thing. Like, I haven't been taught very much about it, but this is somehow just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the fine art angle. So most of my career has been spent trying to figure out that balance or that contradiction or how they work together. So after Australia, I moved to Brooklyn, New York. I moved to Brooklyn in 2001, horrible timing. But I was lucky enough to work right away in a studio in Brooklyn, Red Hook area of Brooklyn. And this is my friend Anders. We both assisted two artists who were in this studio. And this is the work I was making while I was in the city. You can see the tie to the earlier research from Australia. The texture, the shape, but trying to become a little more commercial so that I could survive in New York City, right? Trying to pay the bills, selling the glass. But this is the person that I worked for, specifically Giles Bettison. And Giles is an Australian artist who was living in New York. And he uses an Italian technique known as marini, these little glass tiles that are rolled up on a blowpipe to form a vessel. And Giles and I shared an opinion about the studio glass movement, which is typically described as that point in America where artists started to use glass on a smaller scale. So instead of a huge factory, think like tiny garage studio. And it's told as this very kind of like romantic notion of these kind of like genius, naive artists who rolled down out of the hills and discovered glass for the first time, which I really rebelled against wholeheartedly. Giles shared that opinion, and we both kind of agreed that before there were big furnaces, there were small furnaces, and it was worth re-examining. The other artist in the studio that we worked for was Josiah Mcelhini, and Josiah's work is finely crafted glass, but he's been able to really punch through into the fine art sculpture market. So he's a conceptual artist that happens to use glass. He's also probably one of the top 5 glass makers in the US. He's highly skilled. And he got that skill through an apprenticeship in Sweden. So there was my key. I had this example of two people who had created their own experiential kind of learning situation that was outside of academia, but that could lead me to kind of the informed opinion that I was after through actual experience. So I left New York City on this kind of quest to get that experience for myself. So a little bit of culture shock, from Brooklyn to a little town called Quechee, Vermont, where I started as an apprentice for the Simon Pierce Glass Factory. And if you haven't been, it's worth a trip. It's right on the Ottaquechee River, and Simon bought this old woolen mill He bought an old hydroelectric turbine from the state of New Hampshire, and so he generates his own power, electric glass furnace. And the restaurant upstairs serves delicious food on all the glassware and pottery that they make downstairs. So just a great business model. And the food really is spectacular. So if you're up that way, check them out. These are the things we made. It was very kind of like rustic, kind of like English style, elevated everyday glassware. The price point for a stem is around $60, which is not cheap, but it's not like the feeling that you have to save it for the best occasions. And they're really thick and chunky, so they don't feel like you're going to break them. So we kind of hit a sweet spot within the production market. And it was during my time here that I met glassmakers from all over the world. And this kind of confirmed in me this notion that the story of the studio glass movement was maybe a little bit of a fabrication, you know. These folks, Martin from Czech Republic, Tommy from Sweden, Igor from Kazakhstan, all had experiences that were very different from mine, you know, growing up in the US. So I wanted to continue my kind of factory education, and I applied at factories all over Europe and was, you know, just kind of denied. But when I called Steuben Glass, the hiring manager said, "How did you know we were hiring?" And I said, "I didn't know at all. This is just on a whim." And it was the first time that they had been hiring outside of the union system in their entire history. So their older generation of glassmakers, of gaffers, were retiring at such a rate that they didn't have the traditional 7 years of apprenticeship to bring people through the system to replace them. So it was just really good timing that I was able to kind of begin my apprenticeship there. Steuben Glass, if you're not familiar, was long considered the final word in American craftsmanship. It was given as gifts for heads of state, visiting heads of state from different countries. It was also influenced by fine artists. So here we have Salvador Dali. The vase on the top is Kiki Smith, more contemporary. Georgia O'Keeffe design on the bottom left. So it has a kind of a long lineage of high craftsmanship and fine art. These are some of the pieces that we would make every day. You know, it was 40 to 50, 60 hours a week, blowing glass from 6 a.m. to, you know, sometimes 6 p.m. These are some of my mentors there. So the traditional hierarchy is you have a gatherer, you have a server, and then you have a gaffer. So the gaffer's in charge of the team, and they're responsible for the quality output and the numbers, and also training the team itself. So Steve Bertrand and Keith Walushka could not be different in terms of personality, but they were both highly skilled. Bert was really nice and easy to work with. Wally was not easy to work with, and the joke was always that Wally was so good that they would clone him, but that he wouldn't be able to work with himself. There were some dark days on Wally's team, but I'll always take away the level of precision and skill that he kind of gave me. My own personal work during this time was black with shiny reflective steel because I was tired of seeing through glass all day. Steuben was all clear all the time. So my own personal work was kind of the opposite of that. These are stainless steel pins. So the vessel is blown and then core drilled, and the pins are glued in, and then everything's polished back so it looks seamless. The factory closed in 2010. During the economic downturn, they took a pretty big hit. Luckily, the Corning Museum of Glass, right at that same time, was launching this new program where they had 3 glassblowing studios on 3 cruise ships. The Celebrity Solstice class. That started in 2010. So they were able to absorb a lot of the factory workers who had just gotten laid off. And so it softened the blow a little bit, right? To go from blowing glass in a factory every day to blowing glass in Turkey and, you know, the islands of Greece and Barcelona. It was okay. And I started using the time on the water to kind of look at light and space and kind of the architecture of the marine environment. This is, obviously just a GoPro camera stuck to the porthole. This was not my cabin. I did not have a window. But just this feeling of moving on something so large that it felt more like the water was moving underneath you than the ship was actually moving forward. So just kind of playing with that, and the way the light kind of shifts as the ship would turn, on a new course. So this was a good kind of reprieve, and it kind of got the creative juices flowing again, so that when I entered grad school at Alfred University, I felt fresh again. I felt like it was a good time to bounce back out into the fine art environment. And my interest in architecture continued, looking at folks like Buckminster Fuller, who invented the Geodesic Dome as a way to efficiently cover space. This is from the 1967 exposition in Montreal. It used an early form of lucite, an early form of plastic for the panels themselves, and it was a huge disaster. It caught on fire, and it turns out that plastic was really, really flammable. So it kind of taught me that these sometimes utopian ideas can turn dystopic very quickly. But I took that kind of architectural form and started working with it first in this, really clear homage to Bucky and the Bucky Dome. These are all hand-blown glass components that are then assembled together. And this is about this tall off the ground. And then later, my thesis work involved creating a series of interlocking glass panels using float glass, regular window glass because it's cheap, that are water jet cut out. So there's a water jet with some garnet, and it cuts out these really precise glass tiles that can then stack to fill space, either on a small scale or create walls and dividers and things like that. Here's another version of this. And it was nice to take a break from the blowing process, from the hand-making process, and just think about different ways of using the material. Here's kind of an installation shot from the thesis show. And here again, you can kind of see the Bucky influence with the domes. This work carried me, or followed me to Norway, where I did a residency at the S12 Glass Studio. And I wanted to get out into the city, so I made a bunch of domes. I rented a couple of theater lights and a generator, and I borrowed the director's tiny little Fiat, and I packed everything into the Fiat, and I would go out into the city and set up really quickly and rip the generator on and just get the shot. So it was a real adventure through Bergen, Norway. Here's another piece of that. So teaching, this is at the Glick Center for Glass in Ball State University. I was there for 2 years, and I developed a neon program there. So the students were bending neon the same way you would make neon signs, but more in the pursuit of fine art. And my personal work here was this Apple phone amplifier. So this is really the first time that I reached all the way back to that martini glass and said, oh, right, this is what I should be doing, The same thing happened through grad school where design wasn't really encouraged. So it was almost like I was forced to express my design through these sculptural architectural forms because that was like an established way of making sculpture. So after the haze of grad school wore off, I kind of went back to that design sensibility. So this is from this website, Design Boom. I made the prototypes and I photographed it myself, and I self-published it to this website, which I encourage my students to do. Always get your work out there. It was on the website when the design director for Homegard saw it. He was just about to go into a meeting to discuss the direction of the company, saw the thing on Design Boom and rescheduled. 48 hours later, he was in Muncie, Indiana. And I was kind of like, are you sure you don't want to meet in Chicago? But he was like, nope, this is business. I'll see you in 2 days. So he came out. I picked him up at the airport. And we went to my studio, and I put the thing down, and I put my phone into it, and he, oh, okay, yeah, we can continue. And I was like, thank God. That would have been really awkward if, you'd come all this way. But I went out to Copenhagen. Homegard is part of a parent group called the Rosendahl Design Group, and this is their headquarters outside of Copenhagen. So I was able to go out there for a few weeks, and through rapid prototyping and different design iterations, we locked in the form. Because I made the form myself first, I could translate all that knowledge directly to the factory where it was made. So unlike a traditional industrial designer who might not have the actual hand skills needed to make the thing, I could talk directly to these folks. This factory's in Turkey, and tell them exactly how it was made, give them a few tips and tricks. They gave me a few tips and tricks, and it was a really good dialogue, really good relationship. So essentially, you heat up the one spot, and you have a graphite iPhone, and you kind of jam it in there and drill some holes, and there you go. This is the final product shot for Holmegard. Yeah, so that went well. I feel like I had a real opportunity with them that continues on a little bit later. But part of the process is not stopping there, right? So the next thing I needed to figure out was, well, how do we make these things accessible not just to Apple products, right? Like, how do we make it so that anyone can have any device and amplify it at home? And so to make the prototypes, I used apples because I had them at home and they're easy to carve. And I could just try a few iterations immediately, take a bite, whatever. But it turns out that apples have incredible acoustic properties, similar to wood. They have that kind of dense grain. I tried a lot of different fruits and vegetables, and they're not all equally as good. A red bell pepper, no good. There's too much space inside, so the sound echoes before it's able to make its way out. But the apple worked really well. It's purely by coincidence that it was to amplify an Apple device. But this is kind of like, just a little clip to describe how it happens. It was better than the original with the apple. Yep. So it's a ton of fun. That actually is for a reason, right? It actually informs the design of the product. And so the idea was pick your sphere for your product, buy it separately from the cone, and then you can kind of marry the two together to make it a little more accessible. This never went to market, but a valuable experience nonetheless. The next project I did complete with Holmegard is this little guy right here. I'm just going to pass this around so you can kind of see what we're talking about here. So the design brief was for a planter that would be just as at home in an industrial kitchen as it would be for the home cook, for herbs and things like that. So this is what kind of the design process looks like. These ideas don't just drop out of the sky complete. There's a lot of bad ideas that are generated first, and these are all the bad ideas. And I love to show it because it starts up here with this dome thing. Domes were big that year. Everything was covered in a dome. So I was stuck there for a while, and kind of just at the very end is when it kind of clicked, and we end up at kind of the final iteration. This one here was like going to be a concrete base with a two-part system and a lid, and I was convinced that was the thing. The design director told me, give it one more go. And I'm so glad I did, because this would have been a complete disaster and never would have worked. The final result is all one piece of glass with a glass insert and a nylon wick, so nothing needs to be replaced. It's pretty simple and straightforward. The design doesn't stop with the object itself. We have to package this thing, and we have to explain to people how to use it. So part of the process is written directions that we can translate into a couple of languages, Danish and English, but we can't translate into every language. So we have to create these kind of IKEA-like infographics to kind of explain to folks how to use it. Here's the final set. So the small one is the one that you guys are passing around now. The middle size, great for basil, and the big one, I've had a little money tree in there for quite a while, and it's quite large. It'll do pretty well. Here's some kind of product shots from Holmegard. I was really excited about the one on the right, the Eames bird. The Eames were always, they were heroes of mine for a long time. So this was kind of all in the Ball State days. I returned to Corning for about 3 years. And this is at the Corning Museum of Glass, where I was part of their hot glass demonstration team, one of their gaffers there. And this building is the same building that housed the Steuben factory. So part of it's kind of strange, right? To work in the factory and then kind of see that factory turn into kind of like Disneyland. And to kind of experience the industry from both sides of the coin. But it's a beautiful studio, and this is a typical day. We would make these glass pieces for a packed house of visitors. And, our job was just to get people just as excited about glasses as we are, and it usually isn't that hard. But while back in Corning, I continued working on some designs for barware. So the barware goes through several different iterations here until it lands here. So, again, like this change right here was like a year, and then to get to here, the whole process was more like a 3 or 4 year process to get to this final result. All of these are finished as CAD models, and they're all confirmed with rapid prototype samples. So this is a 3D printer that prints in clear resin. So it's just a way to confirm that your model is correct before you spend all the money getting things made. So here we are, Salisbury University. I joined the faculty about 4 years ago, and so happy to be back. It was really just by good luck that I was able to return. There aren't a lot of glass jobs in the country, as you can probably imagine, and so this was the one job that was open that year, and so I just feel really fortunate that I was able to come back. This is our glass studio right now. And this is the same space where we built the first iteration of the glass studio 20 some years ago, where there was no roof. It was a gravel floor, and we would blow glass as nor'easters came down the coast. So if the power went out, we could throw a tarp over the furnace. It was crazy, but it was a lot of fun. So this space was never purpose built for a glass studio. But the good news is that in 2023, we're moving into a new purpose-built space for the glass department. So we're in a great, thank you. We're in a great position where, despite the challenges of the pandemic, we're experiencing steady enrollment and a little bit of growth in glass. We have about 12 advanced students. We see about 40 intro to glass students every semester from all over campus. So while we offer the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, which is a pre-professional degree in fine art, we also have the Glass 1 class that fulfills everyone's general education art requirement. So we see people from biology, from business, and they're some of our best students. So it's a really great way to work across disciplines and get everyone involved. So stay tuned. More exciting news, happening up at Salisbury. Since I've been back here, I've been kind of shifting my focus away from the kind of like Bauhaus-informed clean design aesthetic, away from kind of like pure function, and kind of coming back into the world of color. And these pieces here specifically have been a real challenge. I've been working on these for the last 4 years, and it's kind of like trying to make something as imperfect as possible, but it still has to look right? So it's a new challenge for me, but very different from, the iPhone clean line aesthetic. Another example of just kind of working with more color. These are some production drinking glasses that I make. And both these and these were a response to COVID. These were things I could make by myself. But this is kind of leading into what's going to happen here in November. So my exhibition will be in November, and the title is I Can Hear the Ocean. And I came up with that title when I was in my studio at school and I had a glass cone from a different project. I put it up to my ear and I could hear the ocean. We've all done that as kids, right? It's just the most kind of like core memory. I can hear the ocean. And so the whole show is kind of built off this idea of that feeling that, an object can bring when it triggers a memory that's so tied to, the place. So these objects will be part of the show. How, I'm not entirely sure. There's still a lot to figure out, but this is kind of my starting point. And these as well. So I think this is a little video here. Let me see. Yeah. So these parts here are also going to be part of the show. So this is making one of these. It starts as a solid piece of glass that's then picked up on a rod and just spun just to kind of get this. I'll pass this around too. Just to kind of get this, the 3 points to kind of flare out. And I'm treating those forms kind of like you would treat like a great piece of meat or something, or a side of a cow. I'm trying to use it in as many ways as possible. So while some forms will remain intact, others are going to be cut off here and will form a wall installation. So these are going to take over some of these walls, and I'll start to kind of dial in those details as we go, but I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great chance to make a body of work specific to the place, and I'm excited to see what happens. And I believe that is it for me. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Yeah.